I'm Joeita, and this is The Pulse. Self-defense has several benefits. Not only can it help you defend yourself against hostile situations and keep you safe, but there are other noticeable benefits as well. For example, building confidence or help you with discipline. It can help you set goals and even prove to be an important factor in improving health and well-being. With that said, I think it's fair to say that there is a perception that the practitioner of self-defense is more often than not an able-bodied person. And of course, it goes without saying, but nothing could be further from the truth. People with disabilities can and do learn self-defense. Some even go on to teach self-defense and avail themselves of all the benefits. It might even be fair to say that self-defense becomes doubly important for people with disabilities who live and travel in a world that was not designed with people with disabilities in mind. Today, we discuss disability and self-defense. It's time to put your finger on the pulse. Hello and welcome to The Pulse on AMI Audio. I'm Joeita, joining you from my home in downtown Toronto. If you have a chance, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel and to click on the bell to be notified about future episodes. We drop an episode once a week, and you can catch that on AMI Audio as well as on YouTube and on the podcast. Feel free to comment with any feedback you have for the show, or if you have questions for the guests that I didn't get a chance to ask. I do look at the comments fairly often, and will try and get back to you as soon as I can. I'm really excited to talk about self-defense because I've had an interest in martial arts ever since my brother, who is fully able to see, got taekwondo lessons as a kid, and he seemed to be having quite a bit of fun with it. And it was pretty interesting to see how one feels a real sense of accomplishment when he went from a white belt to a yellow belt to a green belt and on and on. And I felt a bit left out being blind myself. Well, always wanted to get into self-defense, but wasn't really sure how to learn because it really felt as though it was something that was out of reach for somebody who was blind. My guest today is Jim Turk, who is a aficionado when it comes to self-defense. Obviously, being blind, he's learned and taught himself, but is now also an instructor and is here to talk about his journey with martial arts. Jim, hello and welcome to The Pulse. Thank you so much for speaking to me today.
Hello, thank you. I appreciate you having me on the show.
So what kinds of martial arts have you managed to learn in all these years?
So I always tell people I have one in particular that I love, and it's called Brazilian Ju-jitsu. And it's wasn't specifically designed for blind people, but I always tell people it's a grappling martial art. It's all hands-on, so it's very adaptable for blind people to be able to learn. Very tactile, friendly.
And how long have you been practicing Brazilian Jiu-jitsu?
I first started in 2006 was when I first took my first Brazilian Ju-jitsu lesson.
And so that was almost 20 years ago. How have you changed as a practitioner in all of that time?
Mostly I still consider myself a student. I've been in and out of training myself with some injuries and so forth, but I always consider myself a student still, first and foremost of martial arts, and always trying to learn new things that I can incorporate and what's going to work best for me in being completely blind and my blind students, and not just my blind students, but people in general.
When my brother was taking his taekwondo lessons, there would be an instructor up front demonstrating what to do, and everybody would see what was happening up front and they'd follow along. And it didn't seem like the most efficient way to teach someone who was blind. I mean, I saw what was happening and was pretty discouraged when I had a lesson delivered in that format. How did you actually go about learning? And did someone have to change how they taught you to account for the fact that you couldn't see what was happening in the front of the class?
So a lot of Brazilian Jiu-jitsu is taught with a partner paired up. So you're already hands-on with someone. And it's still kind of that same, like you described, demonstration, where you have the lead instructor in the front of the class with his or her partner demonstrating, and then the class breaks up into their individual partners and they practice that way. So I still always had the benefit of a hands-on demonstration, and most of the instructors that I've encountered are generally willing to come around. They understand, hey, you're blind, you might need some extra, hands-on tactile demonstration. And I've never encountered anybody that was unwilling to do that.
How did you end up discovering jiu-jitsu? Is it something that you found yourself, or were you a lot younger and your parents found something for you to do? What's the origin story there?
So it was actually shortly after I started losing my sight. I didn't lose my vision all at once. It was kind of a slow process. And while I was still in the process of losing my sight, I watched, you might be familiar with it's called the Ultimate Fighting Championship. And it's what they call mixed martial arts. And in the early days, there weren't very many rules and there were no weight classes. And I watched a gentleman by the name of Royce Gracie come in and use exclusively Brazilian Ju-jitsu to defeat his opponents. And he had his hands on them, and it was amazing to see what this guy did that was completely unlike what we generally think of, with self-defense. You think of, like you explained, with Taekwondo, punching and kicking, and it's completely different. It's hands-on, manipulating the joints and limbs of your opponent into joint locks and breaking techniques.
And so how is it that, at a time when you're losing your vision and everything around you is changing? Because I can imagine, as someone who lost my vision a lot, quite rapidly in my early 20s, I was preoccupied with learning how to read and write and travel safely and cook so I could, live in the world. What was the attraction of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the context of someone who is losing their vision and trying to make sense of how they're actually going to go about living their life as someone who is now blind?
So that's a really good question. When I started losing my sight, I found myself nervous about traveling out in the world and scared about, now I have to carry this cane and I'm going to look like a helpless person and I'm going to look like an easy target. And not just that, but just the, learning how to travel, like you mentioned, learning how to just walk around out in public. And it was all very, as I'm sure as someone who lost their sight later, very frightening experience. And for a while I didn't want to leave my house. And I kind of became a shut-in by choice. And after a while, I realized that I couldn't just sit in my house and live the rest of my life, and I had to do something to get back out and in the world and be a person again and be who I was again, despite being blind. And I started learning. That's around the same time that I encountered Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and decided to try that.
I remember when I started to use the white cane, I must have been about 18 or 19, and I chalk it up to the follies of youth because I was in retrospect, quite reckless and not very afraid of being outdoors and traveling. But after COVID-19 and the fact that many of us were forced indoors because of the lockdowns, that's when the fear hit. I remember feeling exactly how you described, not wanting to leave my house, being a bit of a shut-in by choice. And in my case, I have a sighted partner. So if I did ever have to go out somewhere, I would take his arm or hold hands or what have you, and that would sort of take away the fear of traveling independently. I just want to explore this idea a little bit more, that martial arts might actually have helped to build your confidence and ensure that you could travel safely and confidently. Because I find that when you're visually impaired, if you're if you look like you know what you're doing, if you travel with confidence, you even if you don't, that tends to be quite a benefit to you. So how did jiu-jitsu actually help you develop your confidence outside of practicing martial arts so that you could travel safely and effectively?
Absolutely. I appreciate that. And actually, the tagline for my business is building self-confidence through self-defense. Um, After taking a few Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu lessons and learning that despite being blind, it didn't really matter. If I could get my hands on someone, I could protect myself. That was just like a huge, like a light bulb going off in my head. Like, wow, this doesn't have to be this terrifying experience where I'm, hiding indoors and afraid of the world. And just to find out that should I need to, I could protect myself just like any sighted person could. And it really, like I said, it really helped my ability to be able to walk outside and have my head up and know that I was safer than I would have been previously.
Has there ever been a situation where you've needed to protect yourself or defend yourself when you were out and about traveling as a blind person?
I have never actually had to use severe aggressive self-defense techniques. Um, One of the things I show in all of my self-defense courses is I address what I call the annoying or misguided helper. The person, and you probably will know what I'm talking about here as a blind person yourself, the person in public who wants to come up to us maybe without saying a word to us and grab us by the hand or the shoulder and lead us, across the street, maybe when we didn't want to cross the street, this kind of thing. So, I do teach, like I said, I address that first and foremost because despite being irritating and rude, I don't want to break somebody's wrist because they tried to help me across the wrong street, right? So, I show a series of just escape and release techniques. And that's as far as I've ever had to actually get in public, is just making someone let go of me and say, hey, please don't grab me. I'm doing fine on my own. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a huge one. And, I think we've all had that experience of being grabbed by some anonymous person. You're standing at the street corner trying to get your bearings, and suddenly someone's latched onto you and they're tugging you God knows where. And you don't want to be rude. You don't want to be aggressive, but you want to try and get them to let go of you because, it's really disconcerting for anybody to be grabbed by anybody. So talk me through some of the techniques that you might use in that situation to get someone to release their hold on you.
Sure. So most of the time, one of the most common things is they'll grab you by the wrist, and just in a general term, by moving your arm in large circles, you can usually break the grip of someone who is, like I said, we're talking about someone whose intent is to help you. So they're not generally clamped on, real hard like someone who's going to try to control your body movement. So generally by making a circle with your arm, a big circle, like a windmill style circle, will generally get someone to release their grip. And that's when I always tell people, you can take the time to educate, perhaps, or, if you're in a hurry, maybe you don't have the time to educate every Joe Schmo that grabs you and tries to pull you away. And, you can just say something like, no, thank you, please don't grab me, what have you, something like that, to make them know that you're fine without their assistance.
You mentioned before that you teach lessons as well, and I'm curious about who comes to you for lessons. Is it mostly men or mostly women, younger or older folks? Is it people with disabilities or able-bodied people? If you had to observe a few trends, who's coming in that door to get lessons from you?
So here at home, most of my students are actually sighted people. But when I travel, most of my students are other blind people. So it kind of depends on the job. When I travel, it's usually a school or like a rehabilitation center, training center hiring me to come in, and I work with a group of anywhere from 10 to 20 blind people over the course of a couple of days and go through a whole litany of scenarios and possible reactions that you may need to have. But here at home, like I said, most of my students are sighted people. So, but I do find that when I'm doing my classes and I have a mixed group of males and females, oftentimes it's the ladies that are the most excited about learning the techniques. It's interesting. They're often very very excited to learn some things, and some of them, of course, have stories of their own of things that they've been through that they wish they had known how to respond to at the time, or that kind of thing. Like I say, the annoying helper, and these kinds of things. So.
Yeah, but I mean, as a woman, there's a certain amount of fear about traveling by yourself, yeah, dealing with harassment on the streets and things like that. Actually, I took the Wendo Women's Self Defense program. Must have been about the same time you started. It just took like a workshop or two, and one of the things we did at the end was break a board, which was really cool, by the way. But I had no idea, because I was a pretty like slim and not big into exercise or anything. Like I wasn't lifting weights at the gym or anything. I was actually very surprised that I was able to break a board. And the instructor said, the amount of force that took to break the board is 4 times the amount of force you need to break someone's collarbone, and twice the strength you need to break someone's nose. Not that I've ever had to break anyone's collarbone or nose, or a board for that matter. But do people walk away with a heightened sense of their own physical capabilities? Before I took that workshop, I would have said I was a pretty frail little thing, but I felt pretty empowered on the way out the door.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the things that I stopped doing recently because I'm getting a little old, but one of the things I used to do is I would have students practice. Each student would get to do a hip throw on me, practice throwing someone, and I would actually walk them through and show them how easy it is, if done correctly, how easy it is to pick someone up who weighs even 2 or 3 times your own body weight and flip them over and throw them. But what I've done more recently is I show people in a general sense how easy it is to break fingers, and I tell people we kind of have one thing going for us as blind people is that almost all assaults against us will start with a grab. And if someone has their hand on you, you can reach their hand and grab their fingers. And fingers, regardless of someone's size or strength, a big 6.5 foot, 300-pound guy, doesn't matter. Fingers still break really easily. So, it's really easy for someone, like you said, a little person, to do some serious damage if they know what they're doing against a larger person. If you grab a guy's finger and he's got, a broken finger on that hand, he's not going to want to grab you with that hand. He's not going to want to hit you with that hand. He's not going to want to do anything with that hand. And it really, it's like I said, it's fairly easy in that manner to take out a much larger, stronger, bigger opponent. There are other ways too, but that's just one of the one of the.
Yeah, no, absolutely. When did you get into teaching in the first place? Was there a specific moment when you realized that you wanted to teach, or did people start to approach you and say, "Hey, Jim, do you think you might teach us what so that we are a little safer when we're traveling"? How did that all come about?
So it was kind of an aha moment after I was taking my martial arts lessons for a while. I realized the difference it had made in me, and how much how much my self-confidence had increased. And I wanted to try to bring that to other people and show them that we don't have to be afraid and hide indoors.
Other than self-confidence, would you say there have been other benefits as well to your mental health? Often when you think about the benefits of martial art training of any kind, people talk about, becoming more disciplined, just becoming calmer, being able to set goals and having things to work towards. Did you notice any of those benefits for yourself as well?
Yes, yeah. So, of course, in a more general sense, having the goals, I'm always looking forward to continuing to learn and continuing to advance my belt, which of course, requires the discipline of continuing to go to lessons and work on those techniques that maybe I'm not so good at, and maybe I need to work on harder, that kind of thing. Um, Another big benefit is the exercise itself and just being on the mats and practicing with other people. I After the first couple of classes, I had muscles that were sore, the places I didn't even know I had muscles. So, but of course, that's in a martial arts specific class, as opposed to a self defense class. So I do both. I teach both things, and in my self defense classes, there's no previous martial arts knowledge or experience necessary. But in the jujitsu classes, most of the people who come in have some kind of knowledge already, an awareness of what they're getting into, at least.
And how many students do you have at a time when you're teaching in person?
When I go to a school, it can be anywhere from 10 to 15 or 20. There have been a few times where I've taught groups of sighted individuals. I have occasionally, like once a year, I have a group of it's teachers of visually impaired and O&M instructors, and they get together about once a year, and there's around 50 of them when I get in front of them. And of course, it's easier, for a sighted group. I can stand up in front of a sighted group and show them, that I don't need to get around to everybody and get hands on. So I'm easier to do a larger group when it's a sighted group.
And do you compete? Are there competitions? Do you like to take part?
I don't generally take part in competitions. I'm approaching 50 years old, and I recently developed a seizure disorder, and so I've got some physical issues that I kind of stay away from the competitions. But I still train myself on a weekly basis and go to a class and learn under a black belt.
So what belt do you have now? How far are you from getting a black belt? Or do you already have a black belt and you're just...
I do not have a black belt. I have a blue belt, which in Jiu-Jitsu is about halfway up. There's purple and brown in between me and black. So I go from blue to purple to brown to black.
I'm assuming that's the end goal.
That would be the end goal, would be to get my black belt. Yeah.
And when you're teaching groups of sighted people, are they surprised, curious, concerned that someone blind is the instructor, or do they just not care?
Usually they're curious, and after a few minutes of me showing techniques and working with them, they see that it really doesn't matter when learning things like the grappling techniques that I'm showing. It really doesn't matter whether you're sighted or not.
And have you ever thought about teaching online? You mentioned that you travel and you teach classes of different people when you're traveling, but would this be something that lends itself to a Zoom class or something, or would something be lost in the instruction if you were just describing things or demonstrating, but you didn't really have a way to walk up to people and adjust their posture and things like that?
Yeah, so I've done a couple of online classes, lessons with people, but again, it's a little different with with me not being there to work hands on, I do have to tell the student to make sure, they have to have a sighted person on their end if we're going to do a video call to see what I'm doing on this end and be able to go through it. So it's not necessarily the same, but it's doable. It's not out of the question. I've done a few of them.
And tell me a little bit more about your business and how people can contact you if they have questions or if they wanted to get a lesson, be it in person or virtually.
Sure. So my business name is Fight Back Self-Defense, and I am easiest to find on Facebook. You can just, if you look up Fight Back Self-Defense, it should pop right up. You can also Google Jim Turk Blind Self-Defense Instructor, and I show right up. You can read some more about me. I've won an award from the Wisconsin Council for the Blind and been on some other TV shows and so forth. I used to have a website, but the person who was helping me with that is no longer able to help me with that. So the website's kind of out of business for right now. So really, Facebook is the best way to do it. You can also email me. It's just fightbackllc@gmail.com.
Earlier in our conversation, you mentioned that if someone is visually impaired and they're traveling and somebody grabs at them, try to windmill your arms to loosen the grip. Can you think of a couple of other tips you might be able to leave us with so that the blind traveler is a little more confident in getting around?
Yeah, like I said, moving in a swinging your arm in a big circle is usually a good release. I always tell people to don't be afraid to be assertive. Like you said, you don't want to be rude because they're trying to help us and that kind of thing, but never be afraid to be assertive and let somebody know, hey, I don't want to be grabbed. I always tell people a sighted person would never in a million years walk up to another sighted person on the street and grab a hold of them and start pulling them down the sidewalk. But for some reason, because we're blind, they feel not only that they need to help, but sometimes almost like it's their duty to help us, to help the helpless blind person must need assistance. So it's never feel bad about being assertive and making this person let go of you, and really letting them know that it's not acceptable to grab somebody. Again, the odds are, I always tell people, I talk in my lessons about somebody grabbing you and trying to do this, and somebody grabbing you and trying to do this, and I talk about chokes and hair pulls and all sorts of stuff. But the chances are, a good thing is, if you do get grabbed in public, it's almost certainly going to be one of these annoying helpers, not someone who has some harmful intent for you.
Well, Jim, it was really nice talking. To you. I really appreciated the opportunity, and thanks for all the tips. Thanks very much for coming on the program as well.
Thank you so much, Joeita. I appreciate your time, and thank you for having me on.
That was self-defense instructor Jim Turk, who you can reach on Facebook and also find over email, fightbackllc@gmail.com, if you're interested in learning more about his work. And if you wanted to get into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, he's your man. I want to leave you with a funny anecdote from about 20 years ago when I took the women's self-defense class, and I had a woman there who happened to also be blind and had a guide dog, and she said that there was a guy on the street who was hassling her and wanted to help her out, and she wanted to get rid of him. So she turned to her guide dog and said, "Fido, kill." and the guy let go and scurried off. So there's a lot to be said for keeping your wits around you. Anyways, I've told you my fun anecdote, and I do have to wrap it up for today. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe down below. And if you have any feedback, write to us at feedback@ami.ca. You can also give us a call at 1-866-509-4545. That's 1-866 509-4545. Don't forget to leave permission to play your audio on the program. If you are blind or visually impaired and you have a self-defense story, we'd love to hear from you. Find us on X, formerly Twitter, at AMI Audio. Use the hashtag PulseAMI. The technical producer for The Pulse is Marco Flolo. Ryan Delahanty is the coordinator for AMI Audio Podcasts. Andy Frank is the manager of AMI Audio. And I've been your host, Joeita Gupta. Thanks so much for listening.